All right, welcome. Good afternoon. Welcome back to the fourth meeting of the I-77 Express Lanes Local Advisory Group. I'm Peg Carlson from the UNC School of Government, one of your facilitators. And as we always do, I'd like to start just with a brief overview of the purpose and do some introductions because we have some new members joining today who are filling in for others. Happy to see you.
Thank you.
But we try to start every meeting with just a level set with what we're here to do. So the purpose of the group is to advise and provide input for the Secretary of Transportation, who is here today. A couple aspects of this: to analyze the Mercator report options in detail, and just as a reminder about where we are in the sequence of the work. The last meeting at the end of February, the third meeting, was one where you heard in detail about what each of those options would accomplish and had an opportunity to ask some questions and for additional information that you wanted to be able to be prepared to start analyzing them, which we are going to get into today. And then that purpose overall is to be able to assess potential changes for the scope and contract of this project. Just as a reminder, this advisory group is scheduled to wrap up its work by the end of April, and that timeline is important in order for you to have an opportunity to influence the future course of this project. It will be important to be able to weigh in by then. All right, so let's start with some introductions. First, finding out who is around the table today as members of the local advisory group. If you want to share a name and who you're representing. Okay,
I'm Rusty Knox. I'm the mayor of Davidson, and I'm here for Beth Passion, who is nurturing her husband as he has a hip replacement.
Oh,
I'm Mark Brady, representing Mooresville South Florida Chamber of Commerce.
Kurt Noss representing Town of Cornelius.
Brandon Trudeau, Huntersville Chamber.
Mike Russell representing Huntersville.
Bo Memory, the Turnpike Authority.
Lewis Mitchell, Chief Engineer's Office.
Tim Trogan, Secretary, and apologize, I was not able to make the last two meetings. The first one was with influenza. As you guys know, that's been a big problem in our state, but glad to be here because I never want to live through that again.
Jim Taylor, happy that he doesn't have influenza. I'm the Mercator Advisors.
Tony Bowles, Iowa County, 7-4, Jeff McNeil. John Hetler, represent the Chamber of Commerce, and I apologize that this last one I had influenza as well.
Yeah.
So now you're really in trouble, Jim.
I'm glad I'm sitting on this side.
Carlini Ivory, City of Charlotte.
And I'm Pat Kaufman, County Commissioner at Large, and my colleague Jim Puckett, I'm like, where are you? And he's like, he's at the White House.
He's at the White House.
He's at the White House, in the Executive Office Building.
wow.
So he wants everybody to know
Not Jim.
that. So I choose you.
Thank you. And we've met a couple of the NCTA and DOT staff. I think there are also others in the room. I just want to indicate others who are part of the NCTA staff.
I'm Carla Alexic and I work with NCDOT Communications. Nicole Meister is a DOT Communications.
Justin Delancey, NCDOT. David Roy Turnpike. Roger Rochelle, Turnpike Authority.
Adam Gosson with RSNH.
Yeah.
Jonathan Fakla with RSNH. Phil Schwab with RSNH.
And my colleague.
John Stevens, School of Government, UNC.
And Secretary, may I invite you? Do you have any opening thoughts?
Just happy to be here and don't want to waste any time because this time is precious for us, so we're ready to get to work.
Okay. Okay, and we have some ground rules for the group's work. Just bringing your attention to a couple of these today. I think sharing the air, making the best use of the time. We are going to be definitely carving out time today to allow you each to weigh in with your thoughts and reactions about some of the options that are being presented. And focusing on interests, I think, is always another one that I think is extremely helpful for this. If you think about those options as being various potential solutions, one of the things that you're being asked to do as the advisory group is to share your thoughts about what needs do you think would be met by the various options, which ones may not be met as well, and then that's exactly the kind of input that the secretary is looking for. Okay, so agenda for today's meeting in terms of where we left off and where we're going. So in the last meeting, you heard in detail about what each of the options could be able to accomplish. You said that there were several key things that you wanted to be able to then get ready to analyze them. Information about costs, about schedule, about approvals. You are going to be hearing about that today. And there were also several questions that you had from meeting 3 in terms of what the current project looked like, what some of the effects would be. So we'll be starting off with giving you information about that. You also have hard copies at your place, which you can add to your notebook of this is the hourly volumes information.
We'll
You'll go through all that. Okay. And then with the assessment factors, that's where you're here in a bit more detail about the costs and schedule and approvals, how that affects the various options. And then as we start walking through each of the Mercator options in detail, you'll hear about how those would be affected, and then we'll be asking you for your reactions and thoughts about those. What do you see as the pros? What do you see as the cons? What we're proposing is to go through each of those. We are estimating that will mean that you'll tackle a set of them today and the remaining ones in meeting 5, because I don't think there will be time for you to actually weigh in on each of the options just between 1 and 3 today. But between meetings 4 and 5, that's the bulk of what you'll be doing, leaving meeting 6 to be one where you can really come back together and look at everything that you've talked about and be able to give that overview. Okay, so with that, we turn it over to Phil.
Thank you. Okay, good afternoon. As Peg mentioned, we want to cover some of the items that we talked about last time that you wanted information. The first one was the information on HOVs. So with each agenda, there's a 1-sheet HOV count that's been provided. We weren't going to discuss it in detail unless somebody had questions. I believe the location of it was between exits 18 and 19. And so there's a couple of days of data, and then there's northbound and southbound. So it'll show you the total volume of the roadway and what percentage. And we've highlighted the highest HOV count, one in the PM peak and then one for the AM.
Okay, well, this is 2014?
Yes.
So we don't have anything more recent than 2014?
No, I don't believe so, and I don't believe the HOV is operational right now.
Okay.
As well. So.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Good. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Yes.
I'm just looking at the second column, either northbound, let's look at southbound, I guess, the HOV. The first line there says that 1,500, it's 84, and then the total is 2587. I guess I'm confused. What is the 84?
Which line are you on, sir?
11, 18, 14 of the southbound lines. It's 1,500 hours. Very first line.
Yes.
I'm just trying to understand the column. So 84, is that the number of cars?
That's the number of HOV cars.
So at 3 o'clock, there was no cars for an hour. Yeah, I jumped out at 3 o'clock, so I had a question that there was no cars for the entire hour.
0 to 300, so that's 3 in the morning.
3 in the morning, yes, no cars.
Okay. And the total would signify what?
Total volume of the
Through the entire
southbound.
Southbound complete. Gotcha. Okay.
So that makes up a 24-hour count. That's why you have 2 different dates.
guess my only question would be, is this pretty standard with HOV lanes that you see across the state?
Across the state?
Because I'm looking at 5%.
This is the only one.
This is the only
It's the
one.
only HOV lane in the state.
So it's pretty standard.
Extremely standard.
It's the total volume.
It's the total volume.
Total volume.
Do you have any total volume numbers excluding the HOV that are more current? Because this area has had, great growth in the last few years.
Well, this is 2014, so.
So,
We have more recent counts. We have more, NCDOT conducts traffic counts on facility every year. But the question at the last meeting was specifically the volume in HOV lanes and the general purpose lanes. So the last time that was conducted separately for those facilities was that we had access to quickly was 2014. But NCDOT conducts traffic counts on this road pretty much between every interchange, pretty much every year.
okay, and this is also just between exits 18 and 19. So the HOVs, that's the only exits where they are?
That's where the traffic counts were.
That's where the traffic, what exits are the HOVs?
Well,
Previously, the HOV ran all the way to the 277 interchange.
Okay, that's
in
what I
South
thought.
Park. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So this is just the biggest of this. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, and the next item is the operational characteristics. There was a report that was done, and that's been provided through, was it email?
Yep, Harley sent that in along with the email that she sent out yesterday, along with the agenda. It was a link.
There was a report from Texas Institute where they had looked at managed lanes that allow trucks in their facilities, and so they have data on that 3 locations that they had identified where they did allow trucks of some sort. Yeah, so that's been made available, so if there's questions about that, we can probably go through that after the meeting so we can get through everything else unless you have something pertinent on it now. The next item is anticipated travel speeds along I-77 with the project, and Rod has got some slides that he's going to cover on that, as well as the details of the access points and how much distance you have from getting onto the interstate to getting into the express lanes and then being able to get out of the express lanes and make it to the next exit safely. So that's also something either Rod or I will cover with the graphics that we
Just
have.
to clarify, when you say express lane, you're talking about total.
Yes.
And when you say managed lanes,
Same thing.
Same thing, I'm
it's the
sorry.
same thing, so all of these terms are interchangeable.
There are definitions, but to
With
keep
the
it simple, I'm
exception
going
of
to say
the
express
standard that
lanes.
it was built to. Because remember last time, express lanes were built just to handle cars.
Right.
HOT and HOV can handle trucks, correct? That's what we talked about last time. Was because there was a difference between the two. The express lanes out here
Right.
built to just handle cars, and then everything else from an HOT or an HOV.
Generally, when we say express lane, what it generally refers to is sort of the policy under which they operate. So it generally when you just say express lanes, they don't have a, you're sort of describing, you're sort of paying, everyone in the lane's paying. When we say hot lanes, generally what that speaks to is the policy that allows cars with multiple passengers to ride for free. But I don't recall that from the last meeting, so I apologize. But we can
Because it was a compare and contrast between what was built in the southern part of the county, 485, versus what's being built out here.
Yeah. So one of the options on the table for those projects is a full express lane where there is no HOV component or a modified HOV component. Whereas for this project, this has got a hard HOV3 component, hot lane component, where passengers with three or more passengers in the car can ride without a toll.
So to clarify your question about the construction.
Oh, okay.
The I-485 extra wide shoulder, it does have full depth asphalt as the normal lanes. In this particular project, the pavement structure is not as stout for the I-77 corridor.
So this is not a normal, we do not have normal up here. So because we complained about that before, that it's.
No, and I'm sorry. There is a difference in terms of those projects, but different projects across the country are built to different standards. The ones here are not built with full depth pavement.
We're not happy about that.
I
I guess along those same lines, so we know that the managed lanes are not built to normal interstate highway standards because they were designed to just handle cars. Can somebody from DOT may come in, like, what is a standard road, how many years does it last, and if we put, and I know you can still travel trucks on it, it would just not last as long. Is that accurate? And so is there anybody that would be able to tell us, hey, a standard interstate lane might last 20 years, but because we have built to a lower depth, it's going to have to be seriously reworked after 10 years? I'm throwing numbers out.
We can get that answer.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Can I ask, are we the only ones who have a managed lane that's under construction that is at this lower standard of less depth?
Amen.
So there are other ones as well? Can you
Yes.
tell me where?
Yes, I can get that information for you too.
Okay, but the one in Charlotte, in the southern part of Mecklenburg County on 77 and on 45, that is to the normal standard of where they do have the depth so trucks can be on it, correct?
Yes, because I think at the time, the state's policy was to build shoulders to accommodate future widening for general purpose lanes, because typically we weren't looking at managed lanes. In this case, because the project had already been designed and we were converting it to a managed lane, we were converting what was originally going to be a shoulder that could accommodate general purpose in the future. So it was because of the late decision at that time to look at managed lanes on that facility.
And, I mean, I know this is a previous group than which you're in, but it's important that the public understands that.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Again, good afternoon. My name is Tadas Venkatla. So Phil and I will co-present several slides throughout the presentation. The first thing I'm going to talk about is some graphics that you have already seen in all three meetings. I'm not going to walk you through this graphic, but this is just a reminder. This shows the project limits, which basically goes from 277 up on Charlotte to exit 36. So I'm slide 8 of the slide deck that you have there. So the next set of slides is kind of going back to one of the questions several of you had was, at the last meeting, we presented, or maybe the meeting too, we presented information about congestion. How does the congestion look like on I-77 versus other similar facilities across the nation or across the state? So we gave you some information that was all for years 2016 and 2017, so basically current data. One thing came out of that discussion was, how does that existing or current congestion going to change with the project? So that's the first piece of information I'm going to share. Let me get one more thing, then I'll show you what this is. So the top piece of information you are seeing, this is the same information that we presented you at the last meeting. This is the 2017 field observed speed along I-77. Just to remind you all how this graphic works, we are basically saying I-77 that would go from left to right. These are different exits. Exit 11, which is 277, 13, that's 85, 19, 485, 28, which is where we are, and then goes further into 33 and 36. And along the corridor, we divided that into 5 segments. If you remember that, primarily we did that 5 segments based on the traffic count data. We had information that what we normally refer to as AADT, that is the average daily traffic volumes, and then number of lanes. So based on number of lanes and AADT, which is again traffic volumes, we split it into 5 segments just to show you what the existing speed is or currently observed travel speed is in the peak hours. This is all talking about the peak hours, which should be the worst time of the day. So again, this information is basically what you saw last time, the speeds. in the southern section are about 30 miles per hour with 8 lanes. Then in the central section, you go 6 lanes with 49 miles per hour, and then 4 lanes with 27 miles per hour. Further north of where we are now, you go with 4 lanes and 24 miles per hour, and finally 4 lanes, 51 miles per hour. Again, that's today, right? So with the project, what I'm going to show at the bottom is how do we anticipate these speeds to change once the I-485 open. And we are presenting everything to 2017 because that is the analysis that we have in NEPA and which matches with the field observed field observed speed for the same year. Any questions? I know there's a lot of information before I kind of go through the next set of numbers. I just want to make sure, just trying to make sure that you all are following what I'm showing here. Yes, sir.
Your average deals with a 24-hour span. My concern is that wouldn't give you a real good view based on what actually happens from a practical standpoint. I mean, obviously, your numbers look really good because 11 to 6 in the morning really help you. And so I guess I'd be more interested in the 7 to 7 or 7 to 9 hours than.
These are peak hour speeds, right?
Yes, these are peak hours. So the way we look at this data is, we looked at between 6:30 to 9:30 and 4 to 7. And in those, the data that we have available is hourly speed. So it says average because it's average for the hour. So let me just kind of walk you through. I'll pick a segment here. Between exit 11 and 13, in this case, I don't know exactly whether this is a northbound speed or southbound speed, but we picked the worst case. So if it is northbound, it would have been in the evening between 4 and 7. If it is southbound, it would have been in the morning probably between 7 and 9 to be specific. So in those hours, we looked at hour by hour speed and we picked the lowest speed that happens in the hour. So yes, say for example, this speed is, I'm going to make up, say that is between 5 and 6 in the evening. Yes, at some point between 5 and 6, the speed could have been 20 miles per hour. At another point, it could have been 40 miles per hour. But that is the average for that hour, which is typical how you look at it. I mean, you can certainly go as granular as you want to look at, but typically hourly average is what we look at.
So Roddy, you can look at this as the worst hourly speed in that segment.
Very good, sir. Agreed.
I think the worst hourly is when my speedometer says 0.
Hopefully it doesn't say for a full hour.
No. But,
Okay, so then with the project, again, this is basically the analysis that was performed for the environmental document back in 2012 and 2013. For the same southern segment, the number of general purpose lanes will remain in 8. And we are adding 2 in each direction, 4 express lanes. Then we anticipate speeds in general purpose lanes to go up between 55 and 60, and express lanes to be 60 plus. And that's one thing you will see in this whole row would be it shows generally a range of 5 or 10 miles per hour because we are anticipating it. We don't want to take exactly a number that comes from the model and say it's going to be 63.8. Instead, we are just giving you a general range. So instead of walking you through every segment, I'll kind of populate the information. Same thing between exit 13 and 19, same thing. As you go further, the blue segment here between 19 and 28, you go 45 to 55 miles per hour with a 60 plus express lane speed. And finally, stays pretty similar, consistent between 28 and 33. And finally, as you head north, you basically get 60 plus input. So that is the 2017 analysis. I have another slide that talks about the 2035 analysis that was performed by MPO at that time.
So this was the NEPA analysis?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And did that assume 45 miles an hour in the as far as the throughput goes in the express lane?
Minimum speed 45 miles per hour, but we anticipate it to be 60 plus.
So it raises the question, who would use the toll lanes? If my differential speed is only 5 miles an hour, in some cases it's the same, nobody's gonna be using the toll lane, is that right?
Well, it goes back to the reliable travel time. You're guaranteed you're gonna be going 60 plus. You don't have that guarantee in the general purpose lanes, and most likely in that scenario, the toll rates are not gonna be that great.
Yeah, except that we
Because you're
never-
trying to attract those.
We never get below 40, which is, you know, the maximum throughput, right, is around 45 in interstate highway lanes. Right, so traffic is moving at that point. A couple things about that. First, I don't see there's a compelling enough speed differential to incent people to use a toll lane. And second, we're using 45 miles an hour for the toll lane speed, right? So you're assuming the maximum number of cars in the toll lane. Is that right?
The maximum number of cars?
Well, that's, the target speed is 65 miles an hour, right? There's a big difference between the number of vehicles that go can travel in a lane at 65 miles an hour versus 45 miles an hour. It's a significant difference, right? So we're pulling a lot of cars, we're assuming a lot of cars are, that express lane is gonna be running at maximum capacity, right? No?
The species showing in the express lanes are what the model put out. They didn't assume the express lanes are going down to 45.
Okay. So the footnote on the next page applies only to the next page then?
Right, next page is 2035, right, Robert?
Okay.
It's in the future. This is 2017.
Okay.
Well,
there has to be a basis somewhere of how many cars you're expecting to move in the toll lane to get the 45 to 55, for example.
well, as far as that rubric, my question is, these anticipated speeds, what are you basing that on as far as numbers of cars? Because we've got a 2007 anticipated speed, but we've only got a 2014 number as far as a car count. And so if I look at a 4 o'clock and 7 o'clock and I got 3,800 cars at the peaks, are these numbers figured on 3,800 cars? That's almost a 4-year-old traffic count. Or is it figured on 5,400 cars?
This analysis was, again, we were presenting this analysis to directly answer one of the questions that were raised at the last meeting, but this analysis was actually performed in 2012 to 2013 timeframe. Okay. So obviously even before the 2014. So when they were performing, they did field counts, and they also did analysis to understand what the field speeds were at that time, and you use that information to kind of calibrate your models so that they can predict or anticipate this information.
Well, for the record, I agree with extreme skepticism that once these things are built, we're gonna be zipping through Lake Norman at 50 miles an hour.
Right. I'll just dovetail that it's very hard for this group who's lived with this, and Mr. Taylor, who came out with a report saying the public wasn't aptly notified, and we thought DOT was cooking the books to make their numbers say what they want, to be answering a question by rolling out a 2012 piece of data. As it says here, or 2000, now it's performed by NCDOT in 2013. So,
Right, for context, guys, let's just remember, somebody asked a question, this was the data that was available. Nobody's trying to advocate or convince you or anything. This is publicly available data. They didn't go into a back room and say, well, let's tell them this.
Yeah, this is already done. This is out of the NEPA report.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I will add, you know, because of the questions I've been asked here, we've gone back to the consultant that was used by DOT to put together the traffic and revenue. We used them in Turnpike as well to ask them to do additional counts and do sort of their own analysis. But those unfortunately take a long time, so we probably won't have that data until we're looking into probably the April timeframe. But we've heard the concern before that, you know, about more recent data, and so we're trying our best to go out there and get that.
Yeah, a couple of things I think would help answer both Kirk and Jim's question is, when they were doing the NEPA analysis for the EA, they take the counts that they have in that year, but they projected it to the 2017 year based on the anticipated growth. The volumes that are estimated in the managed lanes are based on how much they estimate it's costing individual drivers. So they'll have a cost for, you know, general laborers, for professionals, and then they'll say, okay, now based on the travel time savings, if it's 10 miles an hour, for the length of it or however much, we think that this person will make this decision based on this breakpoint in cost savings or cost versus time savings. And it'll be an individual decision, and that's how they project how many they think will be using the managed lanes.
Do we know about the percentage that they're projecting for this?
Oh, I'm sure it's in the NEPA analysis somewhere.
We can pull that out.
Find that, yeah.
next slide, again, this is information that was readily available, so we are just bringing this. This was analysis performed by Mumpo, which was the MPO's name at that time, and they performed this analysis for year 2035. And the way they performed the analysis is the way they presented the analysis is in 3 segments, which matches generally how the project was discussed: south, central, north. And that analysis focused mainly on general purpose lanes. The intent was to show that how the general purpose lanes would function, or the traffic will flow in those lanes in 2035. They did not show analysis results for express lanes, but the analysis was performed assuming the express lanes would operate at a minimum of 45 miles per hour. And only one other clarification I want to present is the information you have seen in the previous slide for 2017, that is a detailed project-specific, what we call micro-simulation analysis. Whereas this is based on the regional model, that's why you don't see this as a granular detail as the previous one. Good with this so far? Okay. Unless you have questions, I'll kind of quickly go through this one too. Again, this is answering one of the questions. We actually have a lot of information that we actually have on the agenda. The question was, we presented a set of slides that look like this, that show where the access points and direct connectors are. We talked about what the access point means, what the direct connector. Direct connector basically is ramps that provide access directly into express lanes. Access points are basically openings that you make a lane change, either from general purpose lanes into express lanes or from express lanes into general purpose lanes. So when we showed that information, there was a question, can you show us the distances? Where are those access points located in reference to what I call upstream, downstream interchanges? So the next 3 slides, basically that's what the information is shown. I'll explain how the legend is, but I can answer any quick questions, or I can always follow up after this meeting to get into any specific details. But most of the information here is same as what you saw last time. These 4, I didn't mean to go that fast. These are the 4 pieces we added to the maps that you saw last time. I don't know how clearly you can see the colors from the back, but what's supposed to be the green number, which are these numbers, is basically supposed to say the distance in feet from where the on-ramp, between the on-ramp to the access point. What I mean by that is, if you're on I-85, you're trying to get into 77, and then you want to get into the express lane, how much distance do you have once you get onto 77 for you to safely make those lane changes to get into the express lane? That's what this distance is showing. The number in orange is supposed to be showing the length of access point. How long is the access point? Generally between 1,500 to 2,000 feet. That's general range, design criteria for those. The third, which is supposed to be the purple number, is how much distance do you have if you're trying to get out of express lane to a downstream ramp to go to a cross street. So you're in express lane, you're using this, what I call egress, to get into general purpose lane, and you have 2,800 feet to make lane changes, which is about half a mile to make a lane change, to get into to take the ramp. One other piece that I want to clarify on this is, there is one area, you will see the orange numbers very small. The reason is, this is the one area where the access points, that in and out, are not together. What I mean by that is, pretty much at all these places, there is a 2,000 feet opening where traffic can either go into express lanes or get out of express lanes. So what you call basically weave. You can do both ways. But this is one area that was right in the vicinity of Westmoreland that you can either go only one way, and because they're only one way, the distances are less than what the two-way would be. Typically, these distances are between 500 and 800 feet. Okay. I'll stop for a second. If you have any quick questions, I can certainly answer that.
Yeah,
Yes,
if it
sir.
goes, oh, go ahead. In the first meeting, I requested that, I mean, some of us are engineers and look at things a little differently perhaps. In the first meeting, I asked, as being also from construction, I would like to see a set of construction documents. And the reason construction documents, because schematics are fine for looking at flow, but it doesn't fine till you kind of take a step back at the bird's eye view going, this could be a point and this could be a problem. And not to mention how much, right, we talk about 2 lanes and we're building 2 lanes, that's 4 lanes. One of my questions is, if we have these extended on-ramps and these extended off-ramps, could there in the future be right away for a third, another managed lane or another GP lane to really have a total of 5 lanes? And are we burning a lane just by access points? So those are the types of things that make more sense to me with construction drawings as opposed to schematics.
And I think the meeting you missed were the meetings we brought those, but certainly we actually have them. We brought them again, so you have access.
Okay.
Certainly take a
I
step.
apologize.
No, it's
you
fine.
didn't want me here last time, but I apologize.
No, certainly here but they're here for you before you leave.
Great, thank you.
I will say they are a small
No, I expect them to be substantial.
They're about my height.
Well, and I think I don't care about the cross-section of the column of the bridge, right? It's really the schematic of the, the plan view.
We have that.
You'll want the signing paper on it. That'll give you the
That's
best.
exactly.
And folks, I just want to give a process check reminder about where we are in the agenda. So this is still the going through the responding to questions that were generated in the last meeting. Haven't yet gotten to the point of the big pieces of information you asked for about cost, schedule, and approvals. So I say that not to say to shut down questions, but just to let you know there's still a lot that will be coming prior to the point where we get to the analysis.
From a safety standpoint, you're going to cover those 2,000 feet at a speed of 60 miles an hour in 20 seconds. You're going to cover that distance at 45 in 30 seconds. What data is out there regarding interactions between people are crossing back and forth, weaving and so forth? So again, as I'm coming north, I've got basically 4,000 feet or 45 seconds to make it from the express lanes to exit 25. So what do we have from a safety standpoint? What can we expect?
I can answer, and anybody please chime in, Roger or Phil. Like I said, the design details. Sorry, connect. Typically, this access point, based on the research that we have done, that research includes what Washington DOT has done because they built managed lanes a while ago, California, Florida, and the TTI, Texas Transportation Institute, that provided a lot of guidelines. Based on that, typical access point openings are anywhere from 800 to 1,200.
Yep.
That's, again, a lot of the design criteria here. That's what is used in many other facilities. Obviously, many of these are more than that. So that's, again, we can certainly share that background information if you want. And only one other piece I will add is the analysis that you saw, the NEPA analysis that you saw, microsimulation. This is basically the design details that was incorporated in the analysis for us to review potential safety aspects or potential weaving aspect at each location. I don't know if that completely answers your question. Anybody please chime in, Phil, Roger, or anybody.
So I would just point out that what you're showing in these weave areas too, we're not pointing out all the advanced signings and the advanced notification that drivers would see as they're going through this. It's not necessarily where they're just going to see, hey, this weave point, move in and move out. There's steps and measures that are taken, and those are reflected in the striping plans and the signing plans as well. So they give you a better idea how to see it.
Another rule of thumb is we typically want at least 800 feet per lane change. So if you're crossing 3 lanes, you want at least 400. And so that's guiding this as well. And I do want to point out, Rod, this numbers don't overlap. So, for instance, that first 4,500 in purple, that is from the very end of the access lane, if you call it that, to the very beginning of the lane. It's just important to note that.
Thank you, sir. Good. Okay. Bill?
Okay, so this is our summary slide of the Mercator options, and we went into great detail about this in the last meeting. So I think they're clear in everybody's mind. And what we wanted to do is go through them one at a time and talk about those impacts. But first, just a recap of what those assessments were, those impacts that we covered. I believe it was in the last workshop regarding potential cost impacts. We want to drill down on each option to make sure that it's clear what the potential cost impacts are for each one, as well as the approvals, and then talk about schedule. And you'll see a lot of the schedule is dependent on the approvals that are needed to move forward with a given option. So just on the costs, we're going to talk through the termination costs on the option when that's part of the option. Cost to complete if construction stops and is to pick up at a later date. Any temporary construction that's needed, that's if construction has to stop and you have to shore up the project. You've got different slopes and everything that you're going to have to protect. You've got openings that you may have additional barrier wall or guardrail have to be installed. Demobilization of the contractor and developer, that's really part of the termination cost that can get factored in if it's applicable. And then design and construction modifications. Some of the options have scope changes, which would require a design and construction modification. And then there's other costs that might be negligible at this point for the discussion, but we don't want to say we've captured everything here.
Again, this is a quick slide showing different scope and funding approvals. We kind of went in detail about each of these, I believe, at our second workshop. As we are going through each option, we will be talking about which of these approvals would be required for each option. And as we are talking about those approvals, we would also be talking about potential impacts to schedule. And when we talk about schedule, generally what we are looking at is the opening date of the facility. What does it take for us to have, or how much impact or how much delay could there possibly be with each option for us to have a facility that is ready to be opened? Are we good? Any questions so far?
So you're gonna tell us what the financial impact of each option, and then my question is, and you said obtaining funding, are the funds available now, and if not, when would they be available?
We'll talk about some of them, but there may be some questions I may not have answers here, and maybe others or secretary or others could chime in some too. And you will see, you know, there are some information we can kind of reasonably, definitely we can just say, but there are some information it's kind of difficult for us to predict, because for some options, we don't know exactly what the new project is. We kind of need to know what the new project is before we can tell you this is how much it costs. But we will present as much information, we will be presenting as much information that we can share for each option.
Why don't you go ahead and drive? There you go. So, option A is determination of the project. This is determination during construction, where NCDOT will come in and finish the project and operate and maintain the project. But this keeps the scope the same, so it's still a tolled express lane system. Next slide. So from a cost impact, you heard.
Let me ask you, Bill, but there is I understand what you just said, but you didn't say anything about the cost to the individual driver. Would the tolls be the same as what we've already heard? I mean, because we were dealing with the Spanish company, so if we took it over, then it would tell us about the rates to use them.
That would depend on how we would operate it, right? Whether
Yes.
we're charging it to maximize revenue or keep it.
Yeah.
So that could be a question mark, right?
Well, and I know Peg mentioned it earlier, the idea is we're gonna go through, and we believe the cost the best we can kind of encapsulate it, as well as the approvals and schedule, and then Peg will document what we think, whether we're ready to talk about pros and cons, and that potentially could be a pro.
Yep, that
If
could
you're
be an
looking for
example.
lower toll rates, there's potential for that depending on how you operate the system.
Right, but again, that's, you know, we're interested, we work for the people, those of us who are elected, so that's what they're interested in. So, and as we have people watching, we have media here, I just wanted to at least bring it up. So we will talk about that at some point.
Yes.
As we go through this in more detail.
After each option, we're gonna stop and give you a chance to talk about what you see as the advantages and the disadvantages of that option before going on to the next one.
All right.
So we'll be able to move through them fairly systematically.
Okay, all right, that's better, thank you.
Sure, thank you.
So for termination, we had talked about termination last time being the senior debt, the greater of senior debt or fair market value. For this particular option, we just covered the senior debt. As you can see in the upper left of being 290 million plus or minus, but we also included a demobilization of the contractor and the developer, as well as the purchase back, so to speak, of the investment they made in an O&M building, which equates to about $340 million. And then the cost to complete, this is simply the construction that we anticipate. We're subtracting out what's already been done to date, and so we have a remainder, which is approximately $264 million. And we had talked last time about having to add more of a contingency on that to cover the additional oversight now that NCDOT would have to operate and maintain it after it's complete, as well as do a new procurement to complete the project. So that gives you a ballpark of what the potential costs are for this option. And Ron is going to go into the approvals.
So with this option, we are basically continuing the same project as it is. Instead of the developer constructing the facility, NCDOT will take over and construct the facility. So there is really no scope change. That's why there is no requirement for any MTP list amendments. One thing I want to clarify is we make a statement here that assuming or provided the project is open by horizon year 2025. The reason that is significant is right now, or let me step back, anytime the MPO performs their project list, they have to group them by what they call horizon years. So there is 2025 horizon year, and then 2035 and 2045. So the horizon is, what's important for that is the project is assumed to be open by that year. It doesn't matter how early or how late it opens, it needs to meet that date. If this option delays for any reason beyond the opening of by horizon year 2025, some of these no's will need to change yes. So I want to clarify that don't mean to intend to say that the suddenly facility is not going to be open by 2025. That's not the intention. The intention is to say that it is a no, provided we stay with that umbrella of assumption that we have right now. Am I clear? Okay. Based on the cost impact that Phil presented, if additional funding is needed, we have to go back to the STI. We talked about STI is the project prioritization process that NCDOT conducts to prioritize projects across the state and identify funding or allocate funding. So the next round of project prioritization is scheduled rather to occur between 2019 and 2021. At the end of that process, list of projects that could be funded or that could be included in the project list for fiscal year 2022 to fiscal year 2031 will be included. I know those are a lot of dates, it's a little bit confusing, so I'll be happy to slow down and explain, but in a nutshell, the project will need to go through the prioritization, which would happen before 2021, so the project could potentially include it in funding between these years. However, this is the part that I was saying that is very difficult for us to predict exactly when that will be included. The reason is the prioritization is all about the relative score of this project compared to all the projects across the state. So it's a competition. based on the criteria STI law has defined, NCDOT ranks or scores the projects, and based on that it gets a score. So it's difficult for us to say that this is when it will be funded, because we don't know what are all the projects that will be at that time and how this will score. Am I clear?
Question.
Yes, sir.
The funds coming that we have to put together, the senior debt and everything, would that come into that capacity there? Would it get in the back of the queue and have to determine how we're going to come up with the funds to pay out the senior debt and the demobilization, as well as the future costs? Is that all lumped together in that process?
I'm looking at the secretary. It's not easy.
So if you stop work right now, and we go out there and we see what we see, and that's what we have right now, until something happens, then we get in the queue. We got to come up with the money to pay out the senior debt also.
Yes.
And that could take out to 2031.
And that was a good template on how the process works.
And you will see the next slide kind of talk a little bit about potential schedule impact, so you may be able to get some more clarification on the next slide.
Well, would the senior debt want to call their debt? I mean, we're sitting there and it's not a finished project, it's not producing revenue, and we're waiting to see if the state's going to come up with the money to pay out the senior debt and to continue the construction. Will that trigger any accelerations in their?
If you terminate, you're required to pay the termination cost, whatever it turns out to be, within 12 months.
So we would have to pay the $290 in 12 months.
The 340.
340. Yeah, 12 months.
Approximately 340. And that'll change month to month as.
But where we going to
equity
get that
comes in.
revenue then if we're waiting to do the 219 and 221 queuing, where we get back in the queue to figure out where we're going to be in the priority of the project with the other projects going on the state? How are we going to bridge and get those funds to reduce or pay off that debt, to satisfy that debt?
If I can add this, that potential, I mean, that's maybe an answer we may not have it. That may be a question we may not have an answer, but again, that may be a potential con of this option. But what we're trying to say is, this is how the process would look like, and based on that information, we all may end up basically saying what you are, how is this going to work, so maybe we should not pursue this. I don't know, I'm not trying to say that that's what we need to go, but that could be a potential situation.
I would like to, as I listen to you, you talk about this is the way it works, this is the standard thing, and there's other parts of the state that need things and blah, 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 blah. And I guess I'm looking at it, and I think probably people in this room are, that we deserve a little something extra. We deserve to be put at the front of the line because of all of this that we're having to deal with.
Actually, I would go one step further, Pat. I would say that I would actually look at this being an exceptional situation. It should be treated as an exception, and see if there's something that there would be direct action taken by the legislature.
You said that very nicely.
I would like to add on to what Kurt said, because I think that's important as we look at this.
Right.
That's the only way it's going to work.
As we look at this, the DOT's position today, their job today is to show us what the rules are. And I will revert to what was said on the floor legislator, the Democratic senator or representative, I don't know his name, but when they are debating House Bill 954, if I have the number right, and he said, and this was 2 years or 3 years ago, this is before many would contend a governor lost, and he said, this is an extraordinary problem. People send us here, and we are elected to find extraordinary solutions. And so I hope this committee wouldn't get caught up with exactly that, but allow the politics and the community to do our job. Because to me, costs are important. I know that the big picture is cost, but at the end of the day, the cost is what we in this community has to take to Senator Berger and Representative Morgan and say, this is what we are more, and this is what we need to do.
For those politicians, you can't back that out. Once we pull the trigger on that, the clock starts ticking on the 340,000. We got to move.
That's a different story. That goes back to negotiations and stuff like that.
Well, additionally, if you're canceling this contract, I think the scoring system goes out the window. It has to. I mean, the importance of of this thing turning back around has to be scored completely different than another project
Well, again, I
around
think
the
we're saying
state.
a little something different than that, we're saying this is an extraordinary situation,
Yeah.
so, and y'all are doing your job, I get that, you know, like what John says, you're showing us the rules and what we have to go by, and what we're saying is, and my hope is that we would actually have intervention from the general assembly.
So and maybe I can help sum it up. I think what you're gonna see today is, you know, the way our process works, complying with the state law. You have our commitment, and that's every municipality in North Carolina, every county. You always have our commitment. We're gonna do everything we possibly can to expedite anything that is a good business decision and makes sense for our citizens out there. But what we gotta do is compare apples to apples at this point, and then once we say, okay, here's where the group with all of these compared equally are looking at, now we can look at how can we do things to expedite this? How can we maybe nuance this alternative that makes it from being longer and harder to a little shorter, and maybe it's not as perfect as we want, but we can save a lot of time. So that'll be later on, but what we really want to do is let you see everything with the same level of analysis, assuming we have to comply with state law, because I haven't been given any authority to violate that. And then compare them all and then say, okay, now looking at all of them together with the same lens, which ones are preferable in each of the regions? Okay.
I guess I wish you would have said that in the beginning. You know, because this is why we're here. This is the tension that's been going on for years in this area. And so the people are at their breaking point. So I would just ask going forward, if there's things like that, tell us that first, before we hear that this is the way the
One of the
process
things
works.
before I bias anyone's opinion is I want to hear your opinion.
Well, I think you know
Yes.
our opinion at this table.
How long will that process take? Because we
Which
had the
one?
time before you put it in the buckets, and what would be the?
Well, that's what I think what the opening comments were. You know, we'd like to go through this, and then by our last meeting at the end of March and early April, that way you can see everything, and then you can say, here's what we think, you know, in these areas.
So those initial reactions,
Yes.
we hope to start collecting today in the next meeting, and then that last meeting is intended to really be that overview.
So the big picture here is, for $640 million in cash and the uncertainty associated with completion and everything else, you gained the state operating the facility. That's all you've gained out of this.
Yeah, that's the primary objective of this
Because it's still going to be operated as an express lane.
Yes,
Under
this option.
Under this
This
option.
Yes.
So even though you may have to go back through STI in this option, for example, you don't necessarily in STI have to have the whole 640 if the toll is remaining, but that's a question we can't answer today. What percentage would be, you know, the public financing that we need in the STI, and what percentage would continue to be toll financed? And that would get back to what are the operational policies? Is it revenue maxing? Is it throughput maxing? And all that changes, you know, but this is the total cost that we were looking at, not the.
Yeah. The other thing is too, if we were to cancel it tomorrow, we may not have the facility completed, I'm looking at your last number there, until 2031. By the time you went through all the.
Depending on what happens in
Uncertainty.
prioritization.
You just have uncertainty.
Yeah.
You're buying an uncertainty to still have it operated as an express
Well, it
lane.
might be 2031 before they would start again.
Or before they get the funding.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, funding, well, yeah.
Probably.
I think we could all agree that wouldn't happen, but, you know, that's what it could be. Push political will about it.
Implications on bonus projects, if that's paid off?
I'm sorry.
Implication on bonus projects if the debt is paid off?
In this particular option, none.
Because you're still toll.
Because you're still, the bonus was for a toll project, so.
Bonus was after debt, wasn't it?
Yes.
No debt?
No, it was,
It was half the toll revenue contributed
against
to
the
the project,
capital cost.
up to $200 million.
So as we keep going through this, so there is no change in the project list.
Similarly, there is no change, no need to perform a new air quality conformity. There may be a need for environmental document because those documents have a lifespan, and depending on when the project will be re-let, that means reinitiated for construction, we may need to do a small update. So I wouldn't really call that as a brand new document, a small update. That means there would be some approvals that would be required from federal and other agencies. So how does all of this translate into schedule? So start with, first step on this would be stopping construction and going with STR. And again, it's the same information, or generally same information from the last slide that I summarized here. The next prioritization is expected between 19 and 21, so that this could be included in 22 to 31. However, the assumption with this blue box here is assuming this project will be funded basically in fiscal year 2022, that we can re-let the project fiscal year 2022. But can we do that? That is a part that we cannot really answer the question, because that is the part that is dependent on the competition of all the other projects or potentially other solutions that you all and Secretary just talked about it. But for the presentation, again, to do that apples to apples, we're assuming that we can re-let as soon as that TIP or that, oh, okay. I just need to maybe look at fat fingers today. So assuming we can restart the construction or re-let the project, construction would occur and the facility could be available, open in second quarter of 2023.
That's saying that when it goes to the STI, that we would be at the top of the list in order to start in 2021.
Yes, sir.
We would push everybody else down, and it would be at the top of the list.
So it's kind of like the best case scenario?
It would make the list, whatever that takes to.
When you think about 5 years in an ST step, the next 5 years from a capital project deployment are pretty well cooked. Think about these things, just to be.
Yeah, we usually lock in 4 to 5, but things change, so sometimes we can add more depending on execution, which right now we've been accelerating projects due to, being able to execute faster.
I'm just trying to get.
And then typically all the recompete occurs in the year, 6 through 10.
6 through 10.
Because even if you score high in year 6 through 10, every 2 years we recompete because that's so far out.
So I'm just trying to get the realistic, the next 5 years are kind of cooked because of the magnitudes of capital projects going across the state when you look at the 10-year plan.
That's a good point, sir. Thank you. Okay. Give it to Peg.
So, I have a pretty good sense people are ready to talk. At least some folks are ready to talk, but we're going to use this kind of slide as we move through each of the options. Are you ready to start? Some people clearly, others may not. I'm thinking Mr. Bowles, I know it's your first meeting here, you're still taking in a lot, maybe some other folks. But then Peg and I are going to then use these flip charts for pros and cons from the whole group. We will say immediately that we're looking only for your individual views. We're not saying that you agree with every pro and every con that's out there. We just want to have that so people can refer back to it. And if people aren't ready, or if there's some other key piece of information or something else that's holding back before you can give the pros and cons on this option or other options, we'd like to know what that is. As Peg mentioned, though, this is our pivot point. We really now are opening it up and want to hear more from you, having had the presentations across the first 3 meetings and earlier today. So go ahead. Peg,
I was about ready to just share an example of one of what I think I heard already in the discussion, and see if this is right. So Mr. Kern, when you mentioned one thing option A would do is make it a state-operated facility. And am I correct in seeing that you would see that would be listed as a pro? Or is that
I think
not?
many in the room would look at that. I think that's a great question, because when we talk about that, when we talk about revenue maximization versus throughput maximization, if it's continue to be managed as an express lane facility, then throughput. But talk about this from the standpoint of what is that difference to the toll payer. If it is turnpike owned and turnpike managed versus private partnership,
So,
where there's a profit motive.
so for roads managed by the Turnpike, we are going, we're going to sort of on the scale lean more towards more cars in the lanes, probably slower speeds. Probably not, I mean, we're gonna hang closer to that 45-mile-an-hour minimum than a private concessionaire might. But generally with that too, there are more people in the lanes. You're spreading the toll out over more people, so generally the tolls are a bit lower. But we're going to also push throughput and push people through the lane, so speeds may not be quite as fast. That's generally the trade-off between the two.
And I would just add, Virginia has publicly owned express lanes and private. The difference really is in the off-peak, and whether or not you're trying to maximize value in the off-peak. During the peak hours, it's the level needed to maintain that speed. So that's why you saw $45 an hour. That was a VDOT operated express lane. That was the rate they needed to go to maintain that. It wasn't because they were trying to make a profit. So I think you can say yes, based upon the limited data sample we have in the US, there should be a difference driven by the policy, but you'll probably see it most in the off-peak hours, not necessarily in the peak.
So at peak, to the toll payer, you're not really going to see much of a distinction in the toll rate. Whether
there would be. I would never say there wouldn't be a difference, right?
Right.
There is an element to which we don't have to cover. We don't have shareholders. We have typically debt we're paying off. That's that. But in the peak it's going to be minimal because you're driving. You got to keep that minimum speed there. But as the peak lessens, that's you'll see in the shoulder sort of timing we call it. But in the off-peak time is when you'll see sort of a larger difference in toll cost.
So for purposes of this exercise, I think potentially lower tolls is a valid pro for you to consider.
And potentially shorter peak traffic times. The shoulders are going to be
Yes,
long.
exactly. You wouldn't maximize the revenue during the peaks as well.
Okay, so I'm sorry, two pros there. Peg's writing down the state operating facility could mean different policy options, and I'm sorry.
Lower tolls and
shorter
peak time.
Right.
Okay. Yes, sir.
I think a huge win of this, and I'm not saying that this is more than the other, we haven't seen the others yet. A huge win of this is being state-owned, and that is control.
Okay,
When
state-owned, meaning state controlled.
State controlled,
is a pro for you.
meaning controlled by the people,
Right.
because we go to the polls.
Okay.
So I think that's a huge win in relative to
Okay.
50 years.
Let's keep going around, share the air. Other folks I haven't heard from yet in terms of pros or cons?
Con is that it'd be difficult to meet these target dates,
Hard to beat target dates.
to satisfy senior debt. Is that senior debt suable? It has to be paid out.
Okay. Among other things, at least, being able to pay the senior debt.
What's the
Would be a
timing
con.
of it, because they pull the triggers 12 months, and we haven't gone, we don't have anything in our back pocket to pull out the money to pay them, we gotta go find the money.
Okay.
Funding, it's obtaining the funding.
Okay, and sort of obtain the funding. Other folks, pros and cons?
My question is, you're talking about when would this project actually take place if we delayed it? And, I mean, would it be like a construction zone and basically, is it really, I don't know if it's really feasible to stop it now? And, again, I am concerned about the money and the amount that it would, and basically that it would be extremely costly.
Okay, so the stop, wait, and pick up again is a con, if I'm following your argument. Okay?
Because of the delay
The
and
condition.
potential expense.
The temporary condition of the facility while you
Exactly.
get another project.
It wouldn't look too good for us as far as, the Puckett, is that his name? Mr. Puckett? He talked about economic development for our area up the street, up the road. You get a CEO going into the airport and jump in a car and come up the road, and he said, "What's this mess in the middle of the intersection?" And somebody tells him he might turn around and exit before he gets to 36. He might turn around and exit 28 and go back to the airport. We would never know. I mean, that perception is reality, and his perception of what he sees becomes his reality, and it becomes our reality too.
hope I'm getting this, Rusty. Public perception and especially around economic development of trying to bring in new people.
When they come in to look at
This
stuff, they're looking
Okay.
for problems.
Other folks we haven't heard from, I'm sorry, keep going.
And
Ms.
what
Hutter.
are the legal ramifications? You know, if we change it now?
I'll just bookmark that for now. I want to make sure we're focused on pros and cons, but there could be significant legal ramifications as an open question. Other folks? Yes, sir.
If you're gonna pay the $340 million and buy out the contract, you're still gonna have managed lanes, which that means there's a toll. It's just gonna be state run at that particular point. Yes, it would have more control. Is the juice worth to squeeze on that? I don't know. That's a lot of money to not really take us a whole long way.
Okay, so a lot of money, tolls still there, and to the extent that people want to change and reduce or take off tolls, this would still be accommodated. See if there's one or two more.
On either side, pros or cons, anything that hasn't yet been expressed?
Mr. Curran?
I just want to expand on the economic development piece. When we look at the region, we think over the next 25 years, our state's 10 million people, it's going to grow by 3 million people. And most people presume that 1 in 3 is going to move to the Charlotte region, 1 in 3 is going to move to the Wake County region. So we're going to increasingly become congested, and public-private financing is something we think about in rail, we think about it in air, we think about it on highway. And so if we cancel this, I think we will have repercussions in a broader sense over the next decade plus of whether we would be attracted to anybody for any public-private partnership.
Okay, so heard the potential for other P3s, is that correct?
I would see that as positive.
Okay. Okay. We'll put it on both sides because, again, it's not a matter of what we agree on, it's how people see different features. Let's see if there's one or two more. Again, not thinking of shutting it down. We have most people here. Mr. Mitchell, Mr. Puckett's not part of this conversation, but we want to try to move through as many of these options today and finish at our next meeting, at least in terms of first round. So I'm keeping an eye on the time.
I would just say that, you know, this could have, just in how it would, I always want to go back to the people, of how this would affect the people. People in this area for years have been upset about this, complaining about this, and they feel like they weren't listened to by the previous governor, and many of them switched their party affiliation and voted for Governor Cooper. And I worry that if there's parts of Charlotte where there's hopelessness because of poverty and crime, and I'm starting to see the spread of hopelessness up here among people. And to me, that's very important because that affects families, it affects children, it affects all of us. And it's real, it's just as real as we're talking about any of these things. And I think we should always keep in mind the people. But I do worry about hopelessness, because I'm already starting to hear it when I'm up here. Oh, they're never gonna do anything, this is the same old, and you know, you want people to believe that people who are elected or people at the Department of Transportation are doing the best they can for the people, you know. So I think that's really important, and I don't know how you put that on your chart,
Well,
but I think it's real.
One question may be, so we're going to walk through the different options and give you a chance to weigh in on what you see as the pros and cons of each. Is there anything particular about this option A, so the idea of turning over remain toll roads, but become a state-owned facility, that you would see this particular applying to?
My hope would be that if it were state-owned, that, because we had talked about reducing some of the managed lanes and making them more general purpose to reduce that, so there would be some more relief. So, because that's been a big topic of discussion. So I would, and I know that you wanted to keep it the same, but I still think if it's state-owned, I have hope. If it's not state-owned, I don't have a lot of hope for things in the future.
Yeah, I think we have that with control by the people. That's really kind of goes to that item that you have control over what happens next.
But thank you for adding your perspective and the emphasis about what that may mean in terms of that state control. About checking one last look, seeing if there's anything to add before we move on to option B.
Seeing none? So option B, similar to option A, you terminate the contract, construction would stop. This kind of leaves the door open for scope, whether it remains express lanes or changes. This would require a new environmental document and go through the SDI prioritization process as well, just from a scope change, and we've already talked about funding. So from a cost change, we're using a similar termination cost for this exercise, but the construction cost, since we haven't defined what that scope would be, we've kind of left that as to be determined unless this group wanted to focus in on a specific scope they'd like to see. In general, from the different things we've talked about with modifying the lanes and so forth, I would think that the result would be similar to option A, as far as what it would cost to complete the project in some form. So, Ryan, you want to talk through the scope?
Yes, sir.
Approvals?
Yep. So option B, repeating some of what Bill said, is basically we are stopping this project, going back to CRTPO and local municipalities, so a new project could be defined. So you're kind of starting, I don't want to say clean slate, but you're kind of starting the process again so that you can define what the new project could be. So that means pretty much yes for all the approvals on this. You need to go through CRTPO and get the project is amended, go through the SDI. Of course, you need to perform the air quality conformity because you need to prepare a brand new document, environmental document, because you're looking at a potentially a new project and possibly a new, what we call a purpose and need statement of the project. And then, of course, with the new document, you have new reviews, new approvals that you need to obtain. So how does that look with the schedule standpoint? Do you have a question before I go?
Yeah, I have a question. Who could override that first one, the CRTPO? The requirement. Could that be overridden by the legislature or the governor? Because, I thought it was
federal.
It's federal. So if we had help from our federal elected officials, because that's where our experience was not good here at the CRTPO because of the way it's weighted. And I would expect that this experience would be the same. Right?
Oh, yeah.
Right. So it would have to be federal. So
they could deny in that category. The project. They could say,
Let
no,
me just go through the next one. So when you say, so basically at this point, Jim, please chime in if there is any clarification. What this does is, this basically option would send back to CRTPO and say, okay, the previous project you defined is provide travel lanes, express lanes with a reliable travel time. We are canceling that project. How do you want to proceed with this project? Do you want to do the same thing? Do you want to do something different? If so, look into that and put it back to the STM. That's the intent of this. Jim, is that correct?
Right, we needed an option that didn't have tolls, and we didn't want to say what it would be. It could be general purpose lanes, so it would just go back through. So the point that was raised down there, Mr. Puckett's at the White House today, who knows what he can do, but
yes.
It's a federal
How do you know he's not doing it?
It's a federal requirement that any new project go through this process. And so we wanted an option for you to consider that didn't have tolls. And this would be that option, or one of the options.
So this is what you would declare that Kurt affectionately named complete delete in essence? Or
No, I think Mr. Noss, I don't want to speak for him, and we put it in here, is he was brainstorming, thinking out of the box, is there a way to do B without going to the CRTPO? And the thought was, well, maybe if we let them complete it first, we don't have to go through that. We'll talk about later why that may not be the case. But rather than debating that in my report, I said, fine, let's put complete and delete in. But it's very similar to B. The only difference is the timing. So B would be, if you were so inclined and wanted to just stop it now, then you get an earlier start on trying to get something else through
BOPO.
Well, and I think the difference between B and F, complete and delete, is you're doing the termination, not just negotiating the acquisition and then converting. This is a forced termination with an open end,
Right.
so you don't really know what you're going to replace it with. Versus, buying out the right to convert everything to general purpose lands, which is option F.
Okay, so that's where we talk about the FTP project list. And you'll basically see the STI would be very similar. One thing you will see on all the milestones on this is you see a high. The intent is the exact start date of this is very much dependent on when CRTPO makes the decision of amending the project list. You will see that STI basically starts again in 2019 and ends in second quarter of 2022. Because this is a new project, we need to do a new environmental document. And based on how STI process works, about halfway into STI, you would have enough information typically for NCDOT to start the environmental documentation. So we are starting that as early as we possibly could in this option instead of waiting for the final decision. So you start the environmental documentation and associated air quality conformity with that. And then once the document is complete, you go through all the agencies to get the approvals and the permits so that you could re-let project in 2023 and then construction and opening facility. Two things I want to emphasize on this is all this is number one, very much dependent on when this happens, and very much assumes that this project will basically have funding pretty much in the early part when in the next TIP comes in that 22 to 31 time frame.
Carter cap application.
Yes.
Describe what that is.
So for the STI law, so that we don't aggregate everything in one area of the state, there are corridor caps. So for the interstates, in the 5-year horizon, it's 300 million for any one division or adjacent division. In this particular case, we do have two geographic divisions 10 and 12. So once we hit 300 million in a 5-year period.
For any combination of projects.
That's correct.
And that would include I-77 on the south side of Charlotte as well.
That's correct.
It's part of that 300 million cap.
Yes, good.
Just to clarify, as well as other interchange projects on I-77, basically anything on I-77 in Division and 12, 10 and 12.
Division 10 and Division 12 geographic boundary. That's correct.
Yes.
When we talk about an extraordinary problem, right, and that might be the law, that is something that could be overridden by legislature, correct? That is something I'm asking this question.
Any law passed by the legislature.
Can be overridden by legislature, that's the message.
So, yeah, but the law says any contiguous projects. Contiguous.
Does that
No,
mean
no,
district
no, no.
contiguous or project contiguous?
I think it was meaning, or the least the way we've been instructed is it's contiguous divisions on those corridors, not projects that
We
actually.
can take an action item, I believe it is contiguous projects is what the law says. I had that issue before because if I-77 South starts here and goes south, and I-77 North starts 10 miles away from that and goes north, those are not contiguous.
We'll verify that. Yes, be glad to.
Yeah,
That's
but that is,
important.
that is a key word there is contiguous.
That's important.
All right, so you want to switch?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm going to make this B. As before, it sounds like people were already starting to weigh in with some thoughts about what they see as the upside or downside to this option. You ready to start sharing those? Anybody who feels like they would need more information, more clarification before we?
I will state the obvious, that I speak for my constituents who I represent. The people who I represent would have absolutely no interest going back and asking for CRTPO to solve this problem that they created.
Right.
con is CRTP.
The con is CRTP.
Okay. Other folks, pros and cons?
Well, it's an even longer time horizon than option A.
I'll take that as a con rather than a pro.
And it has more uncertainty.
And more uncertainty?
In part related to CRTPO or other pieces, Mr. Noss?
As far as what the final project would be. The other one we said, well, we'll have a toll facility. This one here is like,
We don't know. Any pros?
cancels the contract.
Good point.
I'd add, I'll speak to Mr. Noss. I think that it would be both a pro and a con, that you would have the element of what the implications are for P3s going forward.
Okay. Fair enough.
Okay.
I just would add, just because I think we ought to have these topics that fall under uncertainty, but I think clarification of Carter cap is important. I think it'll come up with a few others. I also think, in this case, there'll be implications on the bonus projects, Lewis.
So, yes.
I think there'll be implications on bonus projects in this case.
Okay, that would be a con, the implications for those.
I'll just raise
Then
it.
you're referring to federal funding, is that what you're?
No, bonus projects
Bonus
that
allocation.
came in because this was a toll project.
That's my point, you're talking about financial standpoint.
Yeah, yes.
I
Let me
just
just
wanted to
Well,
clarify.
projects that haven't been completed or started yet.
Right.
Let me just ask the question. It seems this option, per what Jim was talking about, is it gives the opportunity to redefine the project, that it wouldn't be tied to the rules of HOT lanes. Is that a pro or con for people to be able to redefine it, assuming it could get through CRTPO?
It's a con because CRTPO gets to redefine.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So, yeah, then, hear a lot of silence, and I'll just make a note that one thing we talked about for the discussion today and our next time is try to make sure we have enough time for when we start an option to give enough time to complete. So certainly we're going to go on for one more option, maybe two, maybe three, but as we get closer to that 2:45 time, we may want to stop rather than try to start an option in the middle. So just want to let you know what our thinking is for the remainder of our time.
I'm not sure if it's pro or con, but between 2009 and 2016, the Metropolitan Planning Organization, part of CRTPO, they have, with input from citizens, it's been voted like at least 7 times to have express lanes. So I think you have to take citizens' input into consideration.
So the way you're describing it, sounds like a possible pro would be, if it went back to CRTPO, that you think there's a mechanism for public input on priorities into what CRTPO does?
Well, the only way to do that is if we, on weight, Charlotte's 48% vote on CRP.
And with
Because
due
they,
respect, I'm sorry, well, we've had citizens input. We had 40 people speak. We sent them thousands of petitions and sent hundreds and hundreds of emails. So the citizens have already weighed in on this, more so, they received more comments on this project in a public comment period than they have in the CRTPO's entire history, public comment history combined.
And, Kurt, I beg to differ with you, and that might have been at one area, because I think about the area that, I represent, and I know I'm here from the city of Charlotte, but I'm just thinking about, I live off of 16, and if you think about and I can't say from Huntersville, but from exit 19 on down, I'm talking to individuals who did not have input on this project, and I'm telling you what I'm here to represent them. So I feel like, yes, you guys did, and you had meetings, and that's no fault of yours, but if you talk about the constituents that I represent and the meetings that I've been attending, no, we did not have an opportunity for input. We did, when I talk to them now, they do want the express lanes, and they do feel like it's not feasible to cancel. So that's, you asked us for our personal And that's what I'm expressing.
And with all due respect, they had the same opportunities and the same meetings that we have here in the Lake Norman region. And quite frankly, Charlotte is not affected by the tolls like Lake Norman is. The traffic flows just fine south of 485. And as we learned at the last meeting, the stretch of 77 through the Lake Norman region is the most congested corridor in the state of North Carolina. And that's why the people have believed it so strongly.
And I believe that we just differ.
And we'll agree with you.
And that's okay.
Final call for pros and cons for option B. Back to Julie.
And so option C had several subsets to it, where it would be, so there's no termination with this, but it's modifying the contract to allow certain things. And C1 is the first one, which would be a modification of the laneage, the express lanes, in a specific area that we're going to talk about. And we can go ahead and go right to C1.
Sorry, just get distracted. Okay.
All right, so C1, Mercator report had referenced modifying the laneage between exits 23 and 28, where currently in the proposed plans, there's 2 express lanes and 2 general purpose lanes. So this would take it down to 1 express lane and 3 general purpose lanes within that limit. The developer would complete the construction and they would also operate the facility. So from a cost impact, there will have to be some design and construction modifications, hopefully nothing too severe. We have an estimate of approximately $10 million to handle that adjustment. But there will be an impact to toll revenue. This is a range we're showing from $75 to $125 million in present day value. By reducing the amount of express lanes in that area, that would be the impact over the contract.
Over what period of time?
The contract term.
Okay.
So, with respect to scope and funding approval, so this does change the original scope of the project. The original scope was to provide 2 lanes from exit 11 to exit 28, 2 express lanes in each direction, and 1 express lane north of that. So this does change the scope change. This does result in scope change. So CRTPO would need to amend the project list, and based on what Phil talked about, it would need to go back to STI for the funds that we just looked at the previous slide, and again the potential time range remains similar for potential funds. Need to redo the quality conformity and do a revised document. This is where there would be some additional. Anytime I talk about environment document, that is an umbrella that covers all the technical analysis that has to be performed to prepare an environmental document, and follow up by review and approvals and permits by other agencies. So how does that result in schedule? So you go back, start with the MPO, the project list amendment, go back to STI, pretty much remains the same timeline as you saw in the previous ones, and you will do an environmental documentation, followed by air quality conformity review. And the way we are looking at this is not really reletting the project, because one thing, you did not see stopping the construction. So construction could potentially be going on, and the facility would open the way it's being designed, possibly, right? Whenever we receive all the approvals and funding, that modification could be made. If the modification we are looking at is converting the second express lane between exit 23 and 28 to general purpose lane, that would happen basically whenever those approvals are received, rather than stopping the construction and waiting for that. Because that's what is presented on this. So you will do the construction, when you receive the approval, it says open to traffic, but that is specifically talking about opening that specific lane to general purpose lanes rather than just express lanes. Yes, sir.
So if I'm clear, then you should probably put a piece in there that says open to traffic in 2019, because it could feasibly do that.
That's a good point. And another part actually on that is we don't necessarily have to start this whole process now if the desire is to actually open the facility like how you're talking about it and monitor the performance and then consider a change like that. This whole thing could be moved to the right of this calendar or schedule as desired or as decided.
In the C1 option, what happens to the bonus money? It goes away?
Some portion of it might, because you're changing you're lowering the amount of toll revenue. The way the law works is based on the amount of toll revenue that's being used to offset the capital cost. So that may be an impact, but again, it depends on sort of what the cost is and what the reduction is in that toll revenue, which we'd have to do the work to find that out.
I thought the amount of bonus allocation was equal to 1/2 of the debt financed through to be financed using toll revenues.
Mm-hmm.
Right, so that's where the 144 million came up with.
Yeah, it's up to, I think, half the capital cost amount that's being paid for by toll revenue, up to the $200 million limit for this project.
An amount equal to 1/2 of the project construction cost derived from toll revenue bonds.
Yes.
So it doesn't have anything to do with toll revenues.
No, but the toll revenue
bonds are
tied to the toll revenue. So if you shift those, that you could end up talking to your lenders, and there could be an impact there.
If there was an impact in the capital structure, then yes.
Yes.
But just the fact that you might not get the same amount of toll revenues.
Yeah, those are different. Yeah,
Especially if the state's writing the check for the toll revenue loss.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's the financing hasn't changed.
Exactly, and that's all that would have to be determined as we work through that scenario.
You also have the issue, at some point, bonus projects are done. I mean, wasn't there a 5-year?
Yeah.
Okay, let's get people's feedback on pros and cons of the first of the C options. What do you like about this option, or what's the downside?
There are no termination costs right now, so that's a pro.
Okay, pro,
So
no
it gets
termination
completed.
costs, that, again, the facility opens but would change in terms of general purpose versus tolls.
We're looking at adding general capacity north of 23.
Okay, add general capacity is a pro.
Might as well just make a default CRTP.
Yeah, yep. CRTP.
Just include that on the next 5 slides. Save us all some time.
Okay.
Was there a year attached to the added general capacity? I didn't hear the last part. Did you say prior to a certain?
Yeah, north of exit 23.
Oh, north, okay. I was thinking, I thought I heard 2020.
And the general uncertainty around financing and timing on any changes.
Okay.
So this should, we should, call this option complete and modify. Because that's really what we're talking about, right? All these other options. Modification and completion.
Complete and modify this one segment.
Well, yeah, well, it's all, this particular option, C through whatever, it's all, it gets completed as is, and then we modify it. But the issue becomes, to John's point, CRTPO is involved in all of this.
Will this delay possibly create, because there's still a possibility of delaying up to 2031, in my opinion, that STI. But would that trigger any covenants in the senior debt? Because that means you delay revenue coming in too. I mean, I know you're finishing the project, but it stretch out
The actual modification, so going through how Rod explained it, you can open the facility as a 2 express lanes and 2 general purpose lanes, and then modify it to convert one of those express lanes to a general purpose lane. So as part of the negotiations on the toll revenue impact, the actual design and construction modification that you do would have some type of impact on revenue during that period as well. So that would all be taken into account with whatever negotiations you do for the loss of toll revenue.
But I think part of your question was we were trying to debt covenant.
No, it would operate as an express lane until you negotiate the deal. And
Right.
the
Yeah.
developer
The state would be paying that
takes care of
toll
their
loss.
investors, so.
Well, the STI comes in and then once they push it out to funding, and changing the funding out to 2028.
Right, so it would be an express lane until the funding's there to convert it to a general purpose lane. But it doesn't convert until there's an agreement with the lenders and the investors.
So that opens the traffic, that stays within that 2023, even if some of these other things push out further?
That would be
On this-
2019. Well, it would actually, and somebody had pointed it out, we would open it in 2019 as a 2-2 facility, 2 express lanes and 2 general purpose lanes until you were in position to get that lane converted.
Basically,
That's if it's at the top of the priority of STI.
I
Well,
think
if you've done.
the easy way to understand is basically all the modification options are, it'll open as it is proposed, and then with these modifications, they may come in sometime in the future, but it opens just as proposed in the plan.
The uncertainty is when could you affect the changes?
Yes. It's
How many
just
years
about
would it take to
how
convert
timing
this?
of the modifications.
That should be done.
And the
As
thought
a- as a-
for floating
as
that,
conceived as an express lane facility.
the
with
thought for
this
floating that as an example is it's a lower capital cost to go through the process. And in theory, if that's your worst choke point, it should score well. And that was one of the arguments during the thing, is that if you just looked at that piece alone, it might have scored better than including the entire 77.
The con is this does not address the lake crossing, which we feel is going to be the next Yadkin River Bridge. It doesn't address that. You saw,
Does not address the lake crossing.
meaning the future significant congestion from the limited capacity across the lake.
I would say continued congestion.
Fair, I will acquiesce to my good friend from Huntersville.
No option does, right? It's being-
Oh, what's that?
No option addresses what you just done.
Well, I'm not looking all things in 23 to 20. Yeah.
Just a quick check, because I think we may have time for one more, since again, the Cs are fairly finer grained. So are we ready to move on and consider C2 is probably our last one for
Well,
today?
I'll flip with Mr. Curran's here. It's a pro that, well, no, to me it's a con that we still have this under private ownership. But some of us may be doing this a pro.
Okay.
Well, we were really more on the P3 impact of canceling it. I mean, the ownership,
In that case,
I think once open, looking at changes is something that can be ongoing. I think it's something we should always be doing. I think the con is, I think there's an uncertainty as to what the implications are to reliable travel time. That's what the project was conceived to deliver, is reliable travel time through this corridor, and to reduce the amount of express lanes each step. But you'd have the benefit of having it open to see how it would, at least in the early years.
But that goes back to the original question, or the original problem. Is it reliable travel time from Lake Norman to Charlotte, or is it really congestion relief within the Lake Norman area? And I think that's what is the real underlying problem here, which the current project doesn't address. You know, because most of us live and work in this neck of the woods. You know,
Yeah, no, I hear you. I know we're talking about a project that gets into, you're gonna be good for 6 to 7 years, and then just the experience in every other general purpose lane environment across the country has been, it ultimately congests again. And the concept here is that you will always have some throughput at a reliable travel time. So, and we're not gonna disagree.
Any other, so the two pros I've got here are no termination costs and adding general capacity north of exit 23. Any others that you wanted to capture on this one? The pros?
Very good. Let's do C2 as our probably last one for today.
So C2 had the idea of providing some type of tolling discount or credit to the local users. This truly hasn't been defined exactly what that would be, but we went ahead we made some assumptions to start the discussion. So from a cost standpoint, I think we'd be looking at something that had less than a $50 million impact, because giving that credit will simply just reduce the toll revenues. So looking at it from a present day value, what that impact could be, we don't know until we define exactly what that toll credit or how you wanted to carve that up as far as the discount that would be provided. So I don't know how we want to exactly move forward on this. I know Rod has got some slides to indicate approval, and I think they're mostly based on the funding.
Yeah, so from an approval, does not really require a whole lot of new approvals, because we're not really changing the scope. The key again here is that as long as we don't change the scope and the construction, so the facility could open by the 2025 horizon year. So in general, these are all no's. That doesn't mean that there is no other entity or agency that has to approve this. There are, but this is really trying to provide you a high-level overview of major approvals that take quite a long time.
So who would approve this? Would the DOT have an authority, or would they have to go to the legislature? Or?
It will be negotiated with Central.
And there's precedents across the country. This was in response to public comments that people who live and work in this area may use it 5-6 times a day. So the discount wouldn't be negotiated for those going to uptown. It would be negotiated in a way for those using this for local travel, and you would set the threshold so that it really would target people who use it frequently as Main Street. But this would be a negotiation between DOT and the private operator as to what level do you want to set that, and what customer are you targeting to provide toll relief.
But where's the funding coming?
It will come from NCDOT.
But what doesn't get funded?
Or what's been done. Virginia's done this a number of
No,
times.
I
Or
understand it can happen. I'm trying to figure out what bucket it comes from.
Right, or they change a term of the contract that has value to the private operator, so there's no cash outlay.
Yeah, so
That's what you want here is a 60-year term.
So if it's a nominal amount of money that can be negotiated within the existing contract, it could be funded through the existing contract as long as we don't exceed money that's already set up and authorized for this, which is about $170 million plus our flex. And so you guys understand all that, what our capital costs were, what the cost of the drain. As long as we don't exceed those, we can do some modifications. And we're assuming this is a fairly nominal cost depending on how it's structured and targeted, as Jim covered.
You had mentioned that other states had discount programs, but had many of those states had Sintra?
Yes, yeah. The Virginia ones where they had the most success were with Transurban, the other ones, but Sintra has been party to these. Sintra did one where they agreed to a discount for HOV2. HOV3 could still go free, but HOV2 could get a discount, and the state of Texas compensated them for allowing HOV2 to pay half of the rate that the single person paid.
Thank you. So I guess, Jim, you pretty much covered the process.
Yeah, I guess for the group, the charge was to provide feedback, but if you don't like this option, you don't like it, but this is what came back from the public, is there a way to provide some? So that's why it's here, not as a recommendation.
How does it work from a practical standpoint? You know what I mean? How do you know what cars, or, you know?
You would have to have a transponder.
You have to buy a transponder now in order to be.
Right, but there's the option for the free transponder, but it would simply be if you used it more than 5 times in a 24-hour period, you get a credit for off-peak travel, or you get a rebate at the end of the year. People do it different ways in different places.
Flyer models.
Exactly. Yeah.
And again, there are a number of models, and you know, I think you know there's time on our end for that, but if we could fill that void, we could do that work pretty quickly on our end to make sure that happened. But again, there's so many different forms of these types of programs that we'd have to find the right fit for you know the goal of, you know, that comes out of this group.
last round today, pros and cons for the toll rebate or discount.
This is a de facto taxpayer subsidy of the private home.
I'll take that as a con. De facto subsidy.
Taxpayer
subsidy.
To the private operator. Okay?
Isn't it generally, toll operators can negotiate to get neutral, C rather than to get, isn't it really a subsidy for the local residents that would be using it more frequently?
Where does the money come from to pay that?
But when they take advantage of their, the first 7 years, we have that $75 million set aside to help, compensate or make up for any toll revenue shortfall. On Brad Street, and so they can take advantage of 45 and that 75 million.
About 49.
I would think that's probably where that money would come from. On that.
Well, that's in there for credit support.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Another pot of money.
I would never never want to say poo-poo something that wouldn't help the community, because I mean, obviously a little bit is nothing, but this feels to me, I'm 31 points down and I just kicked a field goal. Right, so this woefully falls so far short of solving the problem.
I call this the Alamo
And I'm not sure you could put enough berries in there, maybe 3 or 4 of them.
Well, at least I'll get some color here.
Fair enough.
A pro to the users, some relief. Okay, no one wants to say that as a pro.
Yeah, sure, it's a pro. I think of those of us who have been communicating with our citizens for the number of years that we're doing it, the community, people think this is we're against the toll road. This is not. Most of us are not against the toll road. Most of us are against that does not solve the true problem of this area. This project solved the wrong problem.
Okay. Other pros and cons as we get at least near the end for today? Hearing none, just checking back to.
Less likely. Oh, yeah, next, sure.
So we're going to skip forward to our wrap-up as usual, as we like to have feedback from people about what they liked or didn't like about this meeting, especially since the format is likely to be the same, or we could modify it for the next meeting as we move forward on the other options.
Yeah, I think that's the main point and the question for you all as we wrap up is if this works for you, we would use basically this format in meeting 5, which is a week from Tuesday, March 27th, so not as much of a gap between meetings, it's a little, not quite 2 weeks, to continue going through this process for the remaining C options, D, E, and F in this same way. So that's the proposed plan, but now's your chance to say, oh, there's parts of this that didn't work for you, we'll have time to try to change up. So thoughts, reactions about what worked for you about this and what would you do differently, and we can try to incorporate the do differently into our next meeting. And what should we infer from what the silence means? I don't know if it's good news or bad news.
Going through each option the way we're doing, it's pretty good.
I think it's helping us, for us, is having the communication, something that's kind of solidify why, which ones will work, and which ones won't work, and why. I think that this is achieving that goal.
Okay.
I think at some point we're going to need, and maybe it's meeting 7, I don't know, we're going to need a summary of these side by side.
Yeah.
To be able to look at all of them, your cost, your schedule impact, your scope or lack thereof. And then have a wrap-up discussion, I think, around around those after we go through this process.
So need a side-by-side summary of all options to try to be able to look at it all at the same time?
After we go through this.
For like meeting 6.
For meeting 6, okay.
Well, for when we're done discussing these, whenever that is.
Whatever that is.
Some way to conclude. Some way to conclude everything.
Anything else?
Better way to get a handle on the STI process is the impact of it.
Getting a handle on, meaning the likelihood of it rising to priority?
Yeah, of what it would take to go from the end of the queue to the front of the queue.
It may help to send the link out of the current fifth.
We can certainly give you some information on how the process currently works.
How much money is in that bucket?
But one of the things, you know, after you get to the end, looking at all the options, as Kurt talked about with everything side by side, you know, I think it would be probably helpful on our standpoint if we could take some of these scenarios and run them hypothetically. I believe they could help everyone see what the potentials could be, that we could look at doing something like that as well.
I think that'd be very important. But that's a question that stays in my simple mind.
I think clarification of the question on corridor cap.
Yes, we got the answer to that. The corridor cap is contiguous projects or group of projects on the corridor, on the same corridor within 2 divisions. So anything on I-77 in both of those 2 divisions would hit. However, be aware that if it does hit the cap at the statewide tier, it would automatically be considered in the regional tier. So it could be awarded, you know, in other tiers.
There's other ways
You're just
to solve that problem.
You're just limited based on that restriction at the statewide tier.
I remember that term, it's a little vague, so continuous project or group of projects. Does that
Or
mean
group
the
of projects on the same corridor.
Does that mean the group of projects are contiguous?
No.
No.
Because I would say that if it modifies both, but it's a grammar thing, I guess.
The way we've been instructed by legislative staff is the intent is any of projects, whether they're contiguous or not, as long as they're grouped on that same corridor. That's the way we've been applying it as well.
I think going forward, and I appreciate the answers on Virginia, but I think in evaluations, whether it's do it now or I think the more practical answer is once the project is completed, is in an ongoing way to evaluate when is it ever appropriate to pull the lever to buy out a P3 provider, whether it's because you feel restricted in the control element or just the revenue piece. If there's a way to quantify a little bit better what the delta is, I think it would be helpful not just in immediacy, but even if we're 10 years out into this, you know, when's the right time or is there a right time in a constant evaluation, say, you know, it's not something that once the study group is done, if the conclusion is the project's going to be completed and we're going to evaluate, that would be critical to that ongoing evaluation. So what is the delta from the revenue perspective between a public operator and a private operator?
And that's all policy driven, but I'll work with the staff to see if we can give you some.
I think going into, like you said, Virginia is probably the best way to do it, is to look at these comparisons, because the throughput is pretty important.
Right, the qualifier is, there's only been one project that was privately run and then publicly run, and the public purposely ran it like the private did.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The others are contiguous, but let us try to get some data.
That's what I'm saying, and I'm mindful of examples like I think in Atlanta when they opened it, they put a cap of $1 and it was a disaster, right? The lane just filled out. So there's something about you gotta let it flow, and how much is it really going to a private operator when your purpose is throughput, so.
Yeah.
I'd like to ask a question regarding Kurt's concern about the contiguous. Is that something, you said that was what you understood from the staff at the legislature, but is there any way we could get like an opinion from the Attorney General's office on that law, on that statute?
Yeah, we're probably.
So that, because again, he's on the toll, he's also a town enforcement, but, you know, so that he feels, because obviously there's a difference there, but I mean, the Attorney General's office, they do issue opinions on things like this, don't they? I've seen them.
We certainly ask.
Yes.
We certainly ask.
And we just want to note, we're a bit past our time, so if folks have remaining kind of one-on-one questions, or if there's ability for the staff to hang around for a bit to answer the hidden others, I think we want to say thank you very much for the work you've done in this one, and we'll see you on the 27th.
See the snow this morning? Were you down here for that? No. Here? This morning. It's no here, yeah? I know. I'm sorry. Oh, I'm sorry. Excuse me. I want to go.